Good morning, everybody, and happy Martin Luther King Day. For
Yes.
those of you in the US, it is that day of service and celebration. So we are in service today. And our goal is to have no artificial line in the sand between people who have brain changes and people who have brain changes. That we recognize we all have a changing brain, and for some people, those changes are profound. And support, care, appreciation, recognition. So, judging not the person, but figuring out how to support the person is what we are in service of, and we will continue to be in service of. And this past weekend, I got a chance to go up to Tryon Equestrian Center, which sounds really
Oh,
official. It's way out past Shelby and Kings Mountain and Charlotte into the area north of Spartanburg and north of South Carolina, and did a program for North and South Carolina search and rescue. And we talked not only about dementia, we also talked about autism and autism spectrum disorder, which is a sort of a neuroatypical of people or neurodiverse population, and recognizing, wow, that's a whole nother group that's really dealing with challenges in working in a world where people want people to be a certain way, and I can't be that way. I'm different. So today we're going to be talking about different in our few minutes together. And the different that we're going to be talking about is, why is it that people living with dementia sometimes, and not it's not everybody, but people think like a roll of towels or a blanket or a doll or a stuffed animal is real. They really believe it's real. They believe it's the real thing. And sometimes it's so far off. I mean, like, how could they think that? I mean, they think that the person in the mirror is themselves, or a friend, and they need to talk to them. They think they're alive. They think the person on the TV is actually speaking to them. And the reason for that, there are multiples, but I want to show you one particular reason. It turns out vision is critical for function. So I'm going to go ahead and show you what happens to brains over time as these brain changes take hold, and they start not just changing the chemistry of the brain, but also the structure of the brain. And so what you're seeing is the surface, the cortex, the top, from the top of the brain, and down at the bottom of the screen is where you have the prefrontal cortex. Then we have the sensory motor here in the middle, and then at the back is vision. And these two brains, one we would have at the very beginning or even without the brain changes that come with dementia. But the other one that we would have would be at the very end, very close to the end of life when we're living with something like Alzheimer's. And it turns out most brains with a significant dementia would indeed have an appearance very similar to this dried up, wrinkled sort of walnut. And the tricky part is it's shrinking from the inside too. So, what I want to show you is this next slide, because this one is the prefrontal cortex, but we've sliced it off and we're looking from the inside. Now, in that top one, that's a typical aged brain with all the wiring that allows you to control impulses, be logical, make choices consistent with values, allows you to get started, do something well, finish it, and then move on, be self aware, and see other people's perspective. And a lot of that is due to that white stuff called the wiring, but it's also due to the storage units. Now, down below, you see the brain that I might have at the very end of my dementia, where I've lost almost all my wiring. I still have some storage areas, but I don't have a lot of wiring. And the little tiny hole you can see, sort of like you see, sort of like a gray, a brown, I guess it's brownish, beigey colored, darker area right in the middle of all that wiring. That's the front end of a ventricle. Now, down below, you see two huge ventricles, because as the tissue shrinks, the open spaces in the brain that have cerebral spinal fluid in them get bigger. They get much bigger. So, if I can't do these things, then I'm going to have a very difficult time taking in enough data and understanding the data well enough to know whether something's real or it's sort of like that, but not really. And then we're going to add the next layer on, Matthew, if you could. And that's at that back of the brain. So my visual data that's coming in is significantly different. How much I can take in, what I'm able to do with it, how I'm able to integrate it. And if we go to the next slide, you're going to see that, ooh, and then I'm having trouble getting to how I can learn and remember what I learned. So even if you get me to appreciate something one time, I probably may not be able to hold on to that because I will automatically go to the thing that's automatic. Now, there's another element here. Those are the structures, and I've said that, but the next piece we need to take a look at is chemistry. And what we're seeing here is like a slice from front to back, and we're looking at a thin slice. So up at the top of the screen is your sense is this is the prefrontal. Then we have temporal lobes, and then we have back in the back at the bottom there that big globby red area with some yellow. That's your occipital lobe. That's the vision center. And if we look at a 20-year-old, 80-year-old, you don't see a whole lot of difference. Now, the reality is these brains are just laying there. People are lying in the machine. They're not doing anything. The blue, by the way, those are those ventricles. So, Matthew, if you'll go to that next slide. Now we have four brains. We have neurotypical, we have early Alzheimer's, we have late Alzheimer's, and then we have an 18-month-old perfectly healthy child. And the two circles I want you to really take a look at for right this moment are the white one and the green one. So the front of the brain and the back of the brain, front of the brain and the back of the brain in these situations. And if we go to the next slide without the circles, so now you can really see it, notice that it's not a one and done, it's a gradual process. So the probability of being early Alzheimer's being able to realize, well, that's a real child, or that's a real dog, or that's a me in the mirror, that's one thing. But by late in my dementia, it's highly probable I can't sort all that out. I'm doing the best I can with what I have. And if you notice, I have light blue in the front. So what we tend to recommend is go with the person's flow. Be super curious and be very supportive. And as you do that, you can start to engage with the person so that even if they do think that is a real baby, we can help them live life with value and with meaning, because I don't need it to not be a real baby. I need to figure out how to support someone who in that moment is seeing and believing something different than me. And what I might want to do is figure out how to get them to engage with me so we can transition to something else. Or maybe it's just fine. And what they're doing is actually self calming or giving them a sense of purpose and value. Or maybe it's just something to make me feel like I actually have a friend and it's giving me pleasure. So there you go. The kid's brain, nothing wrong with that kid. And you'll notice there's some similarities. How many of you ever had an imaginary friend? So for today, thank you for listening, checking in. I hope that helped sort of figure out why is it that people think they're real and why should we not get upset or freaked out about it, but instead get curious and recognize it gives us a lot of data about what else the person might be able to do and might be challenged to do. So if you're interested in learning more, finding out more, getting more detail on all this, check in info@teepasnow.com if you want to participate in some of the things we're doing and build your awareness of skill as a partner in care, whether you're a professional or a family member or a friend or even an organization that wants to figure out how to do this better. Check out our Care Partner Support Series. They start on February 5th and they run for 5 sessions. It might be just the right thing to help your brain change. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Teepa. Bye, everybody.